Well, hey, welcome back to the Milrad Lab. Today, digging into a new caliber. This on the bench is a Savage Model 99 and 300 Savage. Belonged to my grandfather, that was passed down to my dad, who passed it down to me, and I've now passed it down to my son. Happens to reside with me currently, so I'm going to do load work up for it. We kind of wanted to explore a couple different bullets for it anyhow, and this gives us a great reason to do it here for the channel. It shoots factory ammo pretty well, and oddly, it shoots the heavier factory ammo better than anything else that comes off the shelf. However, I did have around 120 rounds that my uncle had loaded for my grandfather years and years ago that I had utilized over the years and eventually burned through them. So here, I'm going to try to make some different loads using different projectiles just to see what we get. I'm a bigger fan of the middle of the road heavyweight range rather than going 150 or 180. I'm tending toward 165, 168 grain. That's what you see represented here. So to talk about this rifle real quick, it was manufactured in 1953. Beautiful piece. These are just fantastic rifles. They don't make them like this anymore. That's the bottom line. Relatively low serial number range, or serial number in the range for these rifles. You see it equipped here with a Nikon Pro Staff 3 to 9x40. Good God. Well, this is actually a probably downgrade from the old 4-power Tasco that my grandfather had on it. I wanted to be able to see a little bit better at a little greater distance. For the lovers of lever actions, I love the loop on this. A little bit small for a gloved hand, but the best thing about this rifle, and it's the coolest feature they've got, is the round counter in the window. Nothing real sexy about these actions. They do lock up nice, but you've got your limitations. Pressure on this rifle max is supposed to be somewhere right around low 47,000. We're going to try to stay at or below that today. There are plenty of people that shoot CIP all the way up to 52.9. Not going to do that. That's the reason right there. If I put it at the correct angle, you get to see the brass rotary magazine down in there, perhaps. I don't know. This rifle handles real well. Pretty lightweight, 22-inch barrel. Short range rifle. Minute a deer, 0 to 300 yards. Brief history on the 300 Savage. It began its life in 1920 after the Savage 250 3000, which started in 1915. The reason that 250 3000 is that Savage had made a round that launched a 25 caliber 87 grain bullet 3,000 feet a second. It's the first time a commercially available rifle cartridge hit that speed barrier. At the time, it was sort of a big thing. In 1920, they took that 250 3000 casing, they expanded the casing, shortened the neck by about 55 thousandths, of which I'm not a big fan. They steepened the shoulder angle from 26 degrees to 30 degrees. They necked it up to a 30 cal and came out with the 300 Savage. The reason they came out with this cartridge was in an attempt to rival the venerable 30-06. That didn't work out. And then they went on to compete as a 30-06 replacement at some point, but they lacked the velocity to meet the standard. And they also lacked the neck length required to keep a bullet seated correctly or remain straight or concentric to its casing during rough handling or cycling. In the attempt to compete with the 30-06, eventually for replacement, it gave birth to the 308 Win or 7.62 by 51. The 300 Savage is significant in that it was the earliest casing to utilize a 30-degree shoulder, which is now seen in many modern and Wildcat cartridges. She's no speed demon, but it was a really good replacement at the time for, say, other lever action rifles like the 30-30 Win. And because it doesn't utilize a tubular magazine, you could have a spire pointed bullet, which was a huge advantage because, as everybody knows, those flat and round nose bullets that you had to operate in your 30-30, 32 Win specials, the ballistics are abhorrent. This was a huge benefit for the modern hunter at the time. And during that time where everybody was stuck on lever guns, the bolt action was sort of not a thing yet. Bolt action rifles didn't really come into their own until probably like World War II. There were people that operated and hunted with bolt action rifles, but lever guns were the way of the West. They were how everybody got it done. That's plenty about the rifle and the cartridge. Let's get on to loading. So the first bullet we're looking at is this 168 grain Speer Gold Dot, sort of rebaited boat tail, almost a flat base. In 168 grain, it's got a BC, they claim, of 0.572. Here's your cheaper brother, the Hornady Interlock 165 grain boat tail soft point. This one has a BC, well, they claim 0.387. Seems more realistic. It's a cannular bullet. Don't know if we're going to use that cannular. I haven't loaded it yet. It's 27 cents a bullet, pretty economical. Where the Gold Dot, 40 cents a bullet. So it gives you an idea. Little difference, but not major. There is some difference between these two in their overall length and obviously their boat tail. But I think the one that's most critical is the difference, not just in their BC, but the difference in the length of that bearing surface. If you can see that Gold Dot's bearing surface is going to be a lot longer than that Interlock. On to powders. We're going to have two different powders represented here. Vihtavuori N540, which ranks number 117 on the burn chart, at least, I don't know, last year's burn chart. Faster than CFE 223, a little slower than Win 748. So we'll see what we get out of that. We're going to try both bullets using this powder. The other powder we're going to utilize, Accurate 2230. This is on the exact opposite end. This is a much faster powder. It's slightly faster than 8208 XBR and a little slower than Vihtavuori N133. So we're kind of looking at one powder from each end of the spectrum in a way. For brass, we've got 98 Remington Peters cases. These are from several generations. My guess is this represents a good 60 years worth of ammo. Not positive when any of them were made. I did go ahead and weight sort them. It was a way to give me some static matrix to work off of to get them at least in somewhat batched order. It was the best I could do. I'm not expecting long range Chris Kyle accuracy out of these. I want to see inside a minute. I think this rifle's plenty capable of it. If I load for it correctly, this brass isn't really going to be to blame, though it's not going to be super consistent. So the heavy lifting on brass prep's already been done. I did this before I thought I was going to make a video series on it, so we don't get to see the whole process, but these are all annealed. They're full length sized. They were culled on primer pockets and some split necks, though we didn't have any primer pocket issues. And now they're at the point that they are ready to prime and begin to load. Here is today's workup. All right, well, I'm just going to come clean right up front. Yeah, I have a Super Trickler. It's probably the most disco, high-end, fancy piece of equipment that I own. I love it. I'm using it today to save myself some time. But before we get to throwing any powder with the Super Trickler there, we're going to need to prime all these casings. Today, we're going to be using the RCBS Universal Hand Primer. Pretty decent device, very economical. We're going to be using some Federal 210s. That's the primer of choice for this project. We need 98 of them. So we're going to put all 100 in. Make sure we've got them. We've got enough. Everybody knows how this game goes. Oh yeah, 3 times. That's the rabies. Another topic to touch on real quick. What I want to point out is that the 300 Savage, depending on which rifle you're utilizing this cartridge in, but particularly in the case of the Model 99, it's typical that they have a very generous chamber. So my fired brass was averaging 1.596, 1.594 to 1.596 measured on a D400 comparator. So my headspace measurement that I was taking from a datum point here on the shoulder was measuring 1.594 to 1.596. So I brought that back 4 thousandths to 1.590. There are a lot of folks that have this tendency to return this brass back down to what, say, factory box ammo would be. And I'm just going to issue a minor warning against doing that. The reason you don't want to push that shoulder all the way back down that far is when your chamber is that generous, you're going to overwork that brass. And in no time, that brass is useless. You're going to suffer incipient case head separation, or you're going to end up with split necks. One way or the other, you're overworking it. So I'm pushing it back 4 thousandths. That gives us a lot of room for moisture, water, debris, etc. hunting situation, but not so much that you're ballooning that brass back out every time it's fired. Little auto learn time. So I'm asking for dead nuts exact 0. That makes your day a little bit longer, but I feel like it's worth being picky. That wasn't bad. It dumped that charge in 6.2 seconds. You get a powder with a lot bigger kernel size than this, and then you get real problems if you want to be picky like that, because you're eventually going to have to settle for 200s one side or the other. Here I'm just asking for exact. I just want to see if it makes a difference at all for us. Okay, and now it should make the step up to 38.5 grains for round 2. All right, that's not bad. A finer spherical powder like this 2230 tends to meter a lot better. It trickles really well. You end up picking up a lot of speed working with a smaller kernel. And there it'll tell you, ladder operation complete. Time to seat them. We're using the an old school RCBS 15101 full length die set for 300 Savage. I've already got it set up for our first bullet, which is the Hornady 165 grain. And it's not going to be as deep as the book calls for. The book calls for 2.6 at a max. I'm going to be just a stitch above that at like 2.610. And the reason for that is the placement of the cannulure on the bullet itself. If you were to seat it all the way to 2.600, you give up all of that cannulure and you're actually getting into what I believe to be the first portion of the ogive. I don't like it, so I want to stick with it just a hair long here. So with the die already set up and our casings already charged, bullets sitting on top of them, run them up in there. I'm hoping to get, oh, that's the wrong one. On the comparator, 2. Yeah, I was going to say 004, but okay, 003. So that's where we're at. We should have an OAL right around 2.61. Yeah, right there. So that gets us in the mag. I already tested these to make sure. It gets us in the mag without a problem. And it'll rotate. We won't have any issues. Well, there's 2.612. You see how much discrepancy you get from bullet to bullet with those imperfect points. And there's what I was talking about. This is what I was looking for, 2004. So the last one, a hair short. But that's the way they're going to go. If I'm in within a thousandth and a half all the way top to bottom, I'll be pretty happy about that. Now there's another one, 045. So that's that on seating those, and we'll move over to the Speer Gold Dot next. Okay, we'll seat the rest of these rounds with the Gold Dot bullets. They don't seem to be as fickle. They're not as finicky about seating depth. They're interesting in that they tend to seat very nice so long as you get that rebated boat tail started real well. Our cases are VLD chamfered. That helps out quite a bit. Making the numbers on these ones is not as difficult as it is with that Hornady bullet, or at least finding the consistency that you're looking for. These ones have been pretty good. So I've been around 2.016 is what I've been working around. And there you've got a half thou short. You got the same. I think easily we'll end up within a thousandth on all these. Same again. And yet again. I know everybody's different. Everybody's got their own wiggle for the caliper, but you got to make sure you get it seated all the way down. You get your final number at the very bottom. All right, I'll get the rest of these knocked out. So I guess place your bets. I've got no clue. I think that this Gold Dot is going to shoot better than the Interlock, but only because I think that that bullet shape lends itself to more efficiency in this cartridge for the length of the chamber and the length of the throat. That's my suspicion. What you see in that brief ladder explanation is interesting just because I did some study on Gordon's reloading tool, and that's where a lot of that data came from. So those obscure numbers that you see in the ladder for the charge weights, that's how I came to those. Oh, friends, where there's smoke, there's wires. I didn't crimp these casings. Is that going to be a problem? I don't know. It's a lever action rifle, but it sure doesn't have a tubular magazine. And then I looked back at the last couple rounds I had that my uncle had loaded for my grandfather many years ago, and guess what? He didn't crimp them either. Tells me I'm on the right track. Okay, we're out at the range. We've got our target set at 100 yards. This isn't actually the target paper we were shooting at. The target paper that we're using now is JRB's target, and we're using 0.610 inch dots. Well, I don't know how much you talk about all this. Let's face it, if you're going to talk about your victories, you better talk about your losses. Today, almost a total loss. I do find it interesting, though, if you look at that group that's zero point 0.8 inches, also had the only acceptable numbers 4.5 SD and 11.4 ES. One half grain made a massive difference in the way that group came together. We had one other serviceable group, but still not a good group, 1.05 inches, but the numbers were terrible. Velocity very low. I'd be okay at 2,406 feet a second, like that best group shot for a hunting load, knowing that this is a short range weapon. I'd still like to see a little faster. I didn't see any signs of pressure, and that's the good news. Accurate 2230, I think, is completely off the table. I don't think I'm done with the Hornady bullet yet. We're going to get to those next. But the Speer Gold Dot, I still believe it can perform. The proof is there with two of those groups. Somewhere in the mix is going to be the right pressure powder velocity combo that's going to get us to where we really want to be. On the Hornady 165 grain bowtail soft point side of things, this is like a vomit target. I don't even know what you say about that. Massive groups, vertical, horizontal, all over the map. There is nothing to see here. Nothing good anyway. And I apologize for the way I had to mash up all the data on the screen. It was to get around all the errant bullet impacts in that paper. It's the way it is. That's an ugly one. Not going back to that. Any of those combos, those are done. No more investigation here. So now we just have to look into what's going to be next. Got a whole bunch of powders that we can attempt to utilize. Might look at a different bullet to replace the Hornady if we don't like it in the next spin, but we'll see how that goes. Obviously, there's a ton of work to be done here. We're far from finished with this series. I've got a bunch of powders on hand that I'm considering giving a try to. Currently sitting around that are suitable in this caliber. I've got CFE 223, 8208 XBR, Ramshot TAC, Accurate 2520, AR Comp, Power Pro 2000 MR, Ramshot Exterminator, Hodgdon Varget, and some H4350 that might be worth a shot. Obviously, need to get my hands on some IMR 4064, seems to be a go-to. And if you've got any recommendations, please put them in the comments below. I'm still going to keep working on both of these bullets. I think they're both worth investigating. I like the weight class for some velocity, but still carrying a good amount of energy. They seem to hit that sweet spot, in my estimation, for this velocity range. So thanks for stopping by, spending some time with me and Grandpa's rifle. There'll be another video in this series, no doubt. Working on it right away. I appreciate you being here. Until next time, take care, shoot straight.